Now we are really close to you. 100 meters to the Kazal Cheshme Marmaray stop. So this is what we have here. This advertisement for the Marmaray project, a train, a metro, which crosses the Bosphorus, connecting the Asian and European sides of Istanbul through an underwater tunnel, is not a government ad, although there were plenty of those. This ad is by the Surpurgic, or Holy Savior's, Armenian hospital. The hospital is the largest and wealthiest of the Armenian vakifs, or religious foundations, in the city. I first saw the advertisement on poster form inside the hospital itself. It featured in its annual, this one comes from its annual activity report, the back page of it. This one advertisement kept getting the, where's my little clipper here? I'll probably use this. And then in another recent of these same sort of publications by the hospital, you have the details here of how to get to it. So we have the Surpurgic Hospital marked with a little road. Should be detail. There we go. Little road pointing you towards the metro station, towards the Marmaray station. So, of course, for a project of this scale, it wasn't just Armenians who were talking about this. In fact, for weeks, both before and after the opening of the Marmaray, which was officially opened on October 29th, 2013, which just happened to be the 90th anniversary of the foundation of the Turkish Republic, everybody was talking about it. Leading up to it, we had daily reports on whether or not it would be finished in time for the grand opening, if it would be earthquake safe, as the crucial part is a 1.4 kilometer tunnel, which they sort of sunk under the Bosphorus. And also, in the wake of the Gezi protests earlier that summer, people commented on the general pattern of these sort of large-scale interventions into Istanbul. After the opening, it was free to ride for a while, so everybody wrote it and everybody had comments on it. A friend of mine, sitting around in the days after it, who lives in Zeytinburnu, right near actually to the metro station, was telling me how he got on, went across the Bosphorus to Üsküdar, wandered around, had a tea, and came back just because he could. So he was very excited. He said, "You're in Üsküdar in 10 minutes." I said, "I know, that's great, it's awesome." So it was, in fact, everybody who was talking about the Marmaray project. The opening ceremony was attended by the Prime Minister himself, President Gül, the Prime Minister of Japan, as it was a Japanese company which had done most of the work on the project, the Prime Minister of Romania, and the President of Somalia were all present at the opening. Turkish press described it as part of the Iron Silk Road, and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and the Turkish PM Erdogan exchanged speeches extolling the possibility of high-speed rail connecting London to Tokyo via Üsküdar. Yet, between the advertisement by the hospital and the excitement of some of my Armenian friends who attend the Armenian Badarak, or the Divine Liturgy, at various points around the city on a daily basis, I began thinking that there was sort of a specific way in which the Marmaray had sort of affected the Armenians. What the Surpurgic advertisement suggests is how incredibly useful the project was for Armenians. The hospital is by the Kazal Cheshme stop, the Armenian Patriarchate is a short walk from the Yenikapı stop, and in Üsküdar there are 3 Armenian churches, including Surpurgic, which is one of the oldest Armenian churches in the city. It used to be the seminary. Now, of course, I wouldn't want to suggest that the Marmaray was built for the Armenians. A population of 70,000 people, even if it was a population that pulled any clout, would not be a reason for a huge, almost 10 billion lira project. Instead, what I want to explore partially is what I've started to call, both here and then in other aspects of my work, unintended consequences. I mean, it's not a very technical term, but I'm trying to kind of think with this idea. So this is one of the 2 themes, major themes of my paper. The second one, which I'll come to a little bit later in more detail, tries to start from the Marmaray and some of these other transit projects to think about what we could call an Armenian geography of Istanbul in order to think about minority populations relating to these huge megalopolises, huge cities like Istanbul more generally. So first, unintended consequences. My larger dissertation research focuses on Turkish law, ostensibly secular in nature, and how that law, in conjunction with Armenian institutions, like the church, sets the parameters for Armenian collective engagement in Turkey today. This paper is inspired in part by the realization, after nearly daily conversations about commute, the transit wasn't just what I did in between home and the field, this sort of problematic anthropological notion of the field, but rather was a crucial component of the field. And that it too, transit, daily commutes, was shaped by law, governance, and institutions. As another example of unintended consequences, a March 2012 education reform package, widely criticized, known as the 4+4+4, allows for earlier religious education. Again, it's safe to assume that the AK Party was not particularly interested in the religious upbringing of Armenian Christians, but suffice it to say that an earlier possibility for religious education was received quite well within the Armenian special schools. And again, this idea of a sort of unintended consequence of law. So from a sort of theoretical perspective, I don't really, the idea of saying unintended consequences, you've got that little word intention kind of hidden in there. And I don't want to suggest that what I'm trying to get at are the sort of hidden intentions either of individuals or governments for that matter. You can read plenty of speculation about whether or not the Justice and Development Party is trying to turn Turkey into Iran or whatever. I don't find those discussions to be particularly interesting or useful. But rather, I want to think about the intention and unintended consequence, less about trying to uncover these hidden agendas, and more about acknowledging that when it comes to law, as well as other kind of government projects, things like this, there will always be results which exceed the original context of those laws and projects. Here, it should be clear that I'm also interested in thinking about governance, governmental projects, broadly using this kind of notion of unintended consequences. So returning to the question of transit, whatever the city planners actually had in mind when they chose the stops for the new Marmaray, or the more recent expansion of the metro system, it could not have ended up being more useful for Armenians. Mostly, as I mentioned, this becomes apparent through my own movements throughout the city. In Istanbul, Badarak, the Armenian Divine Liturgy, is celebrated nearly every day. Saturday is often the exception, but it too that features in major feast days. So during the week, Monday through Friday, on any given day, you've got about 1 to 3 options of which church you might want to go to in the morning, if you're so inclined. Liturgy is usually attended by some choir members, some older parishioners who go between these churches. So there's a group of dedicated choir members and also parishioners who are there basically Monday through Friday at different points around the city at various churches. I myself, in the course of my field work, I also happen to be a deacon in the Armenian church, so this was part of how I incorporated this field work. I myself go to the Surpurgic Hospital on Mondays. There's a chapel inside the grounds of the hospital. I take Tuesdays off. I head to a small church on the Asian side for Wednesday, and then I try to not go anywhere until Sunday. 3 days is more than enough for me. Other more dedicated, or at the very least with more time on their hands, do go almost every single day. So the first Wednesday after the Marmaray opened, just like the rest of the city at my little church, everyone was talking about going under the Bosphorus on the train. But here it took on a different inflection. Nearly every daily church site had become more connected, easier to get to. This was a group of people who did not simply wake up with an easier morning commute. Rather, the movements which traced out something that could be called an Armenian Istanbul were suddenly much easier. An anecdote from my own commute, the Surpurgic Hospital again. Getting there was not incredibly easy my first year or so of field work. There's a little service, a little shuttle bus that runs fairly close to my apartment. It leaves at 8:06 in the morning. Service doesn't start until 9:30. It was not very pleasant to get myself out the door that early anyhow. And if I missed it, I had at least 2 buses and mini connections, etc., and it would be over an hour of a commute. Now, with the metro line connecting to Yenikapı, and from there, the Marmaray, I have not taken that morning service in several months, and I get to sleep at least an hour longer every Monday morning, getting there in less than half an hour. So, to really understand how dramatic these unintended consequences were for the Armenian population of Istanbul, I think we do have to go looking a little bit deeper, because I do think that these transit projects influenced Armenians a little bit differently because of the way that there's a sort of unique geography or a unique way in which Armenians, and also I would venture other minority populations, live and engage with the city. The rest of this, please bear with me. I don't really do what we would call urban studies, but I realize that after living in Europe's largest city for a couple years, maybe you're sort of constantly an amateur urban studies person just wandering around. So this is my sort of attempt into thinking sort of cultural geography, things like this. So this is the second half here where I'm going to try some of these ideas out on you here. I would suggest that there's a sort of overlaid, so here are the metro maps just for fun, including the Marmaray and the tunnel. What I want to get to that's kind of right. What I want to suggest is there's a sort of overlaid Armenian geography on the city. This terribly hand-drawn map actually goes with some audio that is not going to work for us today. But what I had one of these choir members do with me as I wrote out the map, he told me where he went on any given day. So we can sort of trace out his movements, moving around the city. Oop, I can't do that. I have to walk with that. So he lives here in Yenikapı, and he shows us that on Monday he takes the Marmaray to Kazılçeşme. On Tuesday, there's a nice bus that goes straight over to Beyoğlu. Wednesday, he comes over to Üsküdar, again using the Marmaray, etc. So we sort of have him tracing out the specific places he goes and the ways he gets there using these transits. So the first thing I would note about any sort of Armenian geography of Istanbul is that there are, in fact, Armenians all over the city. This place covers, Asian side, Beyoğlu, Old City, you've got it all. And this, I think, is important for what we've been thinking about. The received wisdom about cities in the Ottoman Empire is that they were quite segregated. There's a small book, Minorities in the Ottoman Empire, edited by Molly Green, and one of the chapters about Damascus sort of tries to maybe complicate this a little bit. And I'm an anthropologist, I'm not a historian, so I'm not going to try to argue that this is not true at all, but I think that maybe we should keep it open in the Ottoman context also of sort of how segregated it was, and certainly how strong these borders are. I mean, these are things that we've been talking about throughout. So, for instance, I have a quote from Zeynep Çelik in the introduction to The Remaking of Istanbul, saying, except for the commercial center, where people of different religions and ethnic groups work side by side, the neighborhoods of Istanbul were ethnically organized. Again, I think we should kind of be open to thinking about this during the Ottoman period. But certainly today, taking a look at this map plus this nice map of the distribution of Armenian churches which are active today, this is from a nice publication by the Hrant Dink Foundation, we can see that there are neighborhoods all over the city which have these Armenian churches. There are certainly neighborhoods which have high concentrations of Armenians. The three major ones being Kurtuluş, Samatya, and Bakırköy are places where we have a sort of densely populated Armenian population. But, I mean, it's by no means homogeneous, obviously. Those are areas that are full of lots of other people also. Other areas, for instance, Kumkapı around the Armenian Patriarchate, used to have more Armenians, but various class concerns and other reasons have had many of those Kumkapı Armenians moving to some of these other more densely populated big three neighborhoods, basically. So, I think that what we see here is that there are Armenians and plenty of other minorities, obviously, also scattered all around the city, even if there are sorts of concentrations. I don't want to skip this too much, but I will just quickly. One of my sort of side interests lately have been the sort of the character of the different neighborhoods throughout Istanbul as I sort of think about this. There's a sort of long literature, obviously, about the city, but also a fun subset of that that really focuses on the neighborhoods. There's a mid-19th century book by the Armenian author Hagop Baronyan. It was recently translated into Turkish, where he sort of gives these lovely, funny little anecdotes about the various neighborhoods. My favorite one is the very first line of the description of Samatya, where he says that we will set aside those who don't drink raka, for they have no right to enter this neighborhood. That's my favorite one. And indeed, the Samatya Square is still a very lovely place to have rakabalik, actually. So you do see these sorts of characters of the different neighborhoods. Again, these are neighborhoods that have perhaps large populations of Armenians, but at the same time there is not today this sort of homogeneity. So what I would kind of want to think about, using my sort of like last comments here, looking at a sort of Armenian geography of Istanbul, is to push out as maybe what it means to live as a minority within Istanbul today. So taking advantage of the unintended consequences of these new transit projects, Armenians move freely between what maybe we could call nodes: churches, schools, neighborhoods that do have dense populations, the handful of Armenian cemeteries in the city, spaces which are in fact distinctly Armenian. Inside those spaces, which are often explicitly behind closed doors, Armenians speak Armenian, worship freely, etc. But moving between those nodes, Armenians, get to do a good job of passing, to quote Goffman. However, many in this doing this passing, they won't speak Armenian on the metro, and in Istanbul, Armenian has a fairly easy time passing. But I would say, though, that a sort of Armenian or other minority geography of Istanbul is this sort of overlay. You have these sort of nodes that are very much in the city. They're a part of the city. They're physical spaces within the city. But I think that people are sort of transversing and now using these sort of new transit projects to move between these various nodes. So to sort of close quickly, I think that what I would sort of like to offer in thinking about our sort of ideas of cosmopolitanism, the first one would be this unintended consequences, which is that various groups are not going to feel the same sort of law or governance or project in the same way. And I think then that the other insight that I hope to have offered is that perhaps as we think of these huge cities that have lots of different populations, to push us to think about the specifics of the way in which people inhabit and move around that as a sort of perhaps overlaid geography. Thank you.